Hello, Sarah. It's so nice to get to you on this podcast, and I'm so looking forward for our conversations today.
Hi, Vivek. Yeah, I'm happy to be here. I'm always excited to get to know new people and, learn a bit about what others think.
Yes, and we start with getting to know you better. So,
Hmm.
what's your story? Just give us a flavor of, where you are, what you do, and what brought you to what you're doing at the moment.
Hmm. Just a small question to start
Just a
with
small question to start with.
then. Okay, my name's Sarah Needham. I live in Potsdam, which is just outside Berlin in Germany, but I think you can probably tell that I'm British. So I grew up on the south coast of England and moved out to Germany in 2006, so quite a few years ago now, and met my husband, and that's why we've based ourselves out of Potsdam. But what's my story? Wow, where does one start with a question like that? I worked for Rolls-Royce for 17 years after I graduated from Loughborough University and worked my way up through a fairly male dominated environment. I was an engineer, or am an engineer, and then actually pivoted my career quite a few times due to actually personal situations, sort of having kids and then wanting to spend more time with my family. And eventually left the company in 2018 to try something different. It was actually triggered by me having burnout and then following the death of my mother during the time I was off with burnout, which really got me to check in with myself. What do I want? If I go the same way as my mum and I've only got, let's say, 35 years left on this planet, what do I want to achieve? What's my purpose for being here? And what kind of role model do I want to show my two young adopted girls as to how to live a life? So, yes, I moved out of the corporate industry and set up my own coaching business. And I now drive by my values of sustainability, technology, and helping people achieve what they want to achieve by being the person they are. So trying to be more like them rather than be less driven by outside influences. So Vivek, I'll let you come back in here because I could talk for hours.
Hmm. No, thank you so much. I know this was not an easy question to start with, like story, but I'm glad that you gave us a good overview about what brought you here. You mentioned that you spent some time with Rolls-Royce in a male-dominated environment, and you were working as an engineer. If And you also mentioned that over a period of time, you felt that obviously changing situation and circumstances in your own life, you you choice of pivoting to your new career was triggered by a burnout. If you may share a little bit about this process of figuring out that you are in a burnout or you're having a burnout and you need to react to it. How was that process for yourself? How did it go?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. The It culminated in me recognizing I had fever, and I was actually just back from a holiday, and it was October, end of October, and I was thinking, well, must just be, I picked something up on holiday. So went to the doctor and um, effectively recognized that there was nothing particularly wrong other than the fact I had fever. So it was a very odd kind of circumstance that I found myself in. And I kind of remember coming home from the doctor's thinking, well, there must be something medically wrong. And they couldn't find anything. And I thought, how have I let myself get to a space where I'm, it's almost like I've run the red traffic lights.
Hmm.
You know, I saw the amber traffic lights and I ignored them. I kind of saw the red traffic lights, but I didn't take it seriously. I just thought, well, I've always managed to continue. I'll just keep going. I'll just keep going. I'll just keep going. And then till I physically couldn't. And I remember sitting there the first few weeks thinking, oh my goodness, what have I done? And how could this have happened? But when you look back on what actually happened, it was quite obvious. I had 2 young adopted children. I've been through an awful lot with the miscarriages, going through the adoption, getting 2 young girls, emotional turmoil around the adoption. And then I had a husband who traveled a lot. I had a fairly high career or corporate career. I had a lot of stress at work, and I had a mother living with dementia in the UK. And when you look at all the facts lined up, you kind of think, well, it's obvious it was going to happen. And yet when you were in it, I just didn't see it coming. I didn't recognize the signs that I was pushing myself to a point where I was making myself sick. So, yes, those first few weeks were really difficult. I remember not wanting to do anything, not physically being able to do an awful lot anyway, but thinking, oh, it'll pass and I'll be back at work in a couple of weeks. And it was really around Christmas time that it was kind of getting to the 8-week stage. I was thinking, why isn't this getting better? Why isn't the fever going away? And they diagnosed it as CMV, which is a virus, but it's only a virus which attacks you when you're low. So if you're healthy, you can have CMV and it has absolutely no effect on you whatsoever. And this was when I recognized, okay, it's burnout.
I think from my experience and others who have talked to about burnout, I think what I know that some people, in this case you were able to actually have a physical manifestation of the burnout stage, which is you felt feverish and you had a fever because of this virus. And I think a lot of people on the other side actually don't even observe such physical manifestations or change, and they just live in oblivion that they're going through a burnout. So I'm glad in one sense that you were able to observe and take and do something about it, because a lot of people I know who go through burnout actually don't even feel anything physical, mental, and they just go through with the process.
No, I mean, it was in some ways it was a blessing that it did happen that way, because it's about giving yourself permission to obviously pull back. And I was off work for 7 months in the end. And even now when I look back, I say I probably went back to work too quickly. And, I pushed myself back into work because it was how you validate, or how I validated myself, is the fact that I have a job and I'm contributing. And yet it was kind of one of the biggest learnings in the fact that things like this take time to recover from. It's not something that you can piece together overnight. And obviously it triggered a much bigger reaction in me in terms of, if I hadn't have had burnout, if my mother hadn't have died during the time I was off with burnout, would I have actually really taken stock of what I wanted to achieve in my life and where I was going? And actually that was the trigger. That was the trigger for me to readjust, to realign, to refocus and get clear on what I wanted. So I think if anyone had said to me that first week when I was off that you'll look back on this and be grateful for it, I think I would have cried in their face. But actually, that's the way it's worked out. That has been the trigger of the changes that I've made. And I have made significant positive changes to my life, in the way I live my life, in the job that I do, in how I assign my time, how I look after myself, how I take my own self-care seriously, that I probably wouldn't have done had I not been through that.
So I think, Sarah, there's so much that I would love to talk to you, and I want to talk to you today also about this transformation that you talked about, the positive changes, and that perhaps led to the career that you have right now of a coach. But I would like to go back a little bit if, um, with the time when you were at Rolls-Royce as an engineer. How was that for yourself? I think you spent like 17 years in that organization. And you also mentioned it was like a male dominated environment. So for an engineer like yourself, how was that environment for yourself? What do you remember now after having spent 17 years in that organization?
Um, I was exceedingly, or I always felt exceedingly privileged by the opportunities that I got given within the organization. So I moved up within the organization relatively quickly. Now looking back, I can see it's because I was different. I do have very strong communication and soft skills, and I am a natural leader in the way that I communicate. I bring people along. I couldn't see it at the time, and this is one of the things that I was really, or is one of my learnings, and one of the things that I really want to help other people with is actually being proud of who you are and the fact you're different. It's your biggest advantage that you have. And that really is what drove my career for the first kind of 7 to 10 years within Rolls-Royce, was being in a male-dominated space, being female, seeing things differently, having a different perception, and being able to play to those skills. So I did the same jobs as other people, and yet I did them differently. I got different results. I could take very technical data and explain it to non-technical people in a way where they didn't feel threatened, they didn't feel confused, they didn't feel silly to ask questions. I could talk to customers in a way where they understood, and we could create solutions together. I could create that space, and I could create space for my team to grow. And those were all really important. And yet, would I say that I saw all of that straight away? No, probably not. And it was really only at the point when I was going through kind of multiple miscarriages, and my husband and I decided, right, well, if we're not going to have a family, then I actually want to do something different. And I actually pivoted from being assistant chief engineer for an engine product to sales. And I remember the questions that I was getting, and obviously I didn't want to answer all the questions. I wasn't telling people what was going on in my private life. But why would you do such a thing? Why would you leave engineering and go into something like sales? And for me, it was a risk, but it was also an opportunity to kind of build this other side of me, which I saw growing, as to what I actually really enjoyed, which was communicating with people, helping people understand things that were techie for people that weren't techie. And that to me was really important. And I loved it. I went and met customers in Europe and Russia and helped them with their problems. And that was a great job. And actually only one I ended up staying in about 9 months, because then we got a phone call one day to say that there's a baby being born who needs a new home, and please will you come and pick her up. So it's weird how these things kind of pan out, but the learnings for me are playing to your difference. Don't try and fit the mold you think a company or a person wants you to fit. Just be yourself, because only being yourself can you provide the most value. Can you achieve the most? Can you feel content with what it is that you want? And I think so many of us try, and I know this is one of the reasons for my burnout, was I felt like I was trying to mold myself, the longer I stayed with the company, into what I thought they wanted from me. And in actual fact, what I was doing was not playing to my strengths, not playing to my values, and actually not creating the most value for the organization either.
Hmm. I think something you said was so amazing, like playing to your difference, taking advantage of the difference, your story, your unique, authentic self. Uh, to me, I think being able to do that on an individual basis in an organization obviously requires an environment that embraces that, which means the organization, the leadership, the team allows yourself to be yourself, to bring your authentic personality, and also to celebrate your difference. And the other side of it is as an individual, uh, you are aware of these differences, and also you are not shying away, playing to that as a strength. So from the dimension of an organization, we need an environment that embraces it, and also from an individual, they're able to play this as an advantage, play this as a strength. How do you see this balance between having an environment and team that kind of allows an individual to play to their difference, to their background, to their authentic self, and the balance between organization and to what an individual can do in that space?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I, as a coach now, I think very carefully before I work with either a group or with an organization, in the fact that I can create the most value for the individual and the organization as a coach when the organization has a culture which supports that individual's growth and the team growth. So I'm very careful in, if you want, choosing my clients as to who I can best support. Because you're right, if there's an organizational culture which is not supporting people to be themselves, not supporting inclusivity, diversity, and really, valuing cognitive diversity, then it makes it very difficult to be able to coach or support someone to create the most value for themselves and for the organization. And that's always the balance, is the individual needs to feel fulfilled and provide value for themselves, but also to the organization. And the way you create that in the most aligned way is when you've got some kind of alignment between the values of the organization and how that's actually lived out, the behaviors of the organization, with what the team and what the individual are wanting to achieve. And this is why I love working with kind of startups, because you can help them create an organizational structure, an organizational culture, which really plays into supporting people, putting people back at the center of the organization, rather than the center of the organization being the technology. How do we create something where our employees can thrive? And knowing that if our employees are thriving and the teams are thriving, we're innovative. We will create value. We will be able to turn kind of ideas into a proposition that works for the customer. So that's obviously a very idealized speak, but yes, it is exceedingly important that for people to thrive, they've got to align to kind of the values and the culture of the organization, but also to why are they there, the purpose, the why as to why they're doing it. And when you don't have this, you don't have the alignment to the organizational values or culture, and you don't have an alignment to the why, to the purpose, then it's exceedingly difficult for people to really thrive.
I mean, to just build upon what you said, do you enjoy working with startups of working on this alignment problem of aligning the organization values to the individuals? From my experience, again, not that broad as yours, I think there are different startups on a spectrum. On one side of the spectrum, organizations like a startup are not aware that they need to do this homework around aligning that values to the individual values, because they are just in a zone to survive, to make it happen. And I think in this stage, in this phase of an organization, it's all hands on the deck. And I think sometimes they don't see the big picture of how misalignment is creating issues. So for those startups in this zone who are not aware that they have an issue where an organization's value is not aligning with individual values, and that perhaps is also creating a burnout, from your experience, what are the ways these companies in this spectrum, in this part of the spectrum, can actually recognize that they have a problem? They're indeed going through an issue.
How you can recognize it is people leaving, so a high turnover of staff, and this can happen anyway in a startup, but if people are really aligned to the purpose of what you're trying to do, the turnover is lower. So if you see a high turnover of staff, and also if you're not able to, how can I put it, explain your story to the customer. What I see a lot is, especially tech startups, it's all about the product, which of course it is. You can't build a company without a product. You definitely cannot build a company without people. And if there's too much product focus and not enough people focus and culture focus, then you end up being unable to actually create a product which fits for your customer. So your why is so important in terms of being able to sell your product, but also being able to engage people who want to work with you, engage your employees. So there's a big piece to do with any startup as to, and the way I normally do it with startups is looking at what the founders, why are they doing this? What's important? And helping them build their story from there. And this, as to why they're doing it, helps unravel, what's important about it, what their values are, and how you use that as like building blocks to start creating this organizational culture. So yeah, it can take a while for a company to understand they've got a problem in terms of organizational culture, especially when they're small and everyone's driving it. But it really is around that point of, if you're unable to engage and motivate and keep your employees, then you really need to look in the mirror and try and figure out, actually, what about the organizational culture is not working? What about what I intended for the company is not playing out in reality? So quite often everyone has great intentions, but actually it's the behaviors, it's the actions that actually matter.
That's actually really powerful. Thank you for sharing that, Sarah. I want to come back to your story, and I think across this discussion, across this conversation, I've always come back to your personal story, your personal journey, and I think that kind of really connects the real point that you're trying to address, also through your coaching exercises. But for me, I think the real story, the real insights are in your own personal journey. You mentioned about your time at Rolls-Royce, being a female engineer, having these different perspectives. You emphasized on some aspects around how you communicated, how you led the work, and your transition to sales over time. A question that popped up for me here is, as you said, you were bringing this different perspective in an environment which is obviously a little male dominated at that time. What helped you to be able to express yourself in your own manner? So being that different person, being the individual you are, rather than just playing on the script of what is expected from you. What helped you to be able to excel at that? Was it the environment? Was it the team? Was it your peers? Because I think there was something going on there at that time where you said like you got a lot of opportunities and you were able to really build up your career really well in that environment.
So I think part of it was networking. And part of it was always having a mentor, somebody I could turn to and be completely honest with. So I had a few mentors during my time at Rolls-Royce, and I was never scared to reach out to one of the seniors and just ask for a chat. And I always had an intention of what I was looking for or how they could help me in some way. Although I don't think I never did any what you might call career mapping. I never knew when I was asked those questions like, where do you want to see yourself in 5 years? And I said, well, it depends on what opportunities arise. And that was really kind of what helped me, was building individual relationships with people, and people seeing how I communicated, and that spoke for itself. So my actions spoke for me in terms of what I stood for, although I wasn't really clear for myself as to actually what that was at that time. And it really is only in the last couple of years I can see clearly, what my values are, or, what my strengths are. I didn't really understand necessarily what that was and how that was working for me at the time. But I did know that I was good at building relationships. I was good at talking to people. I wasn't scared to ask a question. I wasn't scared to say that I didn't understand something, because I'm sorry, an aeroplane engine, because it's a hell of a lot of parts, it's a very complex process. And I think there are very few people who could actually turn around and say they understand everything about an engine. So I just took that as kind of almost permission to ask questions. And I wasn't scared to ask the wrong question, if that makes sense. I just thought, well, if I'm sat here not understanding it, there's probably somebody else in this room who doesn't get it as well. So I'm probably only putting voice to something somebody else wants to ask.
No, that is extremely powerful. So being able to voice your questions and not judging yourself whether you're asking the wrong question, and building a network, investing in individual relationship. And as you said, you had a mentor, you had mentors perhaps in your time. Let's just build a little bit on this, because there's a lot of value and insight in this whole process about getting mentors. How was the process for yourself of acquiring a mentor, finding a mentor?
So when I started at Rolls-Royce, I was on their graduate scheme. So I did sort of 3 months placements in different areas, including internationally in Canada. And I was given a mentor who was in the skill set area which I was employed into. So I was taken in as a materials engineer. I pretty quickly worked out that I didn't really want to go into materials in Rolls-Royce. The facility they had in Derby was put me off slightly. And I wanted a new challenge. So immediately out of the graduate scheme, I went into looking at whole engines. So looking at them in service, working out, how they were working, troubleshooting. And this again was a jump. So I needed to find myself somebody who could help me in this new area that I'd gone into. So I just reached out to a few people and said, is there any chance you would be interested or would have time to have a chat with me? And I didn't necessarily always call it mentoring, but I was asking questions to help support me understand the business, but also sort of understand the company, understand what opportunities there were. And a bit like when they moved me, or my whole department moved out to Germany, which is when I moved here in 2006, they sat us down in a room and basically said, right, this department is being moved from Derby in England, where we're all now sat, to Berlin in Germany. And I thought, oh, that's a cool opportunity. That could be quite fun, 26, unattached. And I remember walking back into the office, and everybody around me had their head in their hand going, I can't believe I'm losing my job. I said, no, you're not losing your job. They've just said, we've all got the opportunity to go over to Germany. And I couldn't, I was honestly astounded by the faces in the room. And obviously now as I grow through it, I recognize when you've got kids and other things, it's much more difficult. But for me, this was just like, this is an amazing opportunity. So when I moved to Germany, I ended up on an international kind of assignment for a couple of years. And again, I looked for somebody locally in Germany who could help me understand what Rolls-Royce Deutschland does and how does it work and how's it different. And so always kind of almost like this inquisitive mind as to what am I missing to be able to do my job better? So it was only literally the first year and a half of my career did I ever have a formal mentor. After that, it was about reaching out to people who I saw and I felt a connection with. I felt I could understand this person. This person has or acts in a way which I can associate with. And I think that's really important in terms of understanding what you want, is finding people who you can relate to, who you can look up to. Not because you want to follow in their footsteps, but because they might be able to help you align your thinking and help you understand a bit more about yourself.
I think this is really, really interesting, because I think what you are doing here is essentially it's a very organic process that you followed. So the process of just following towards the curiosity, the curious journey that you had, figuring out the question that you said, what are you missing to do your job better, and who can help you with that, who can be the right person who can provide you the value of the experience and also guide you through the process. And I think it's very organic in a sense that you're not explicitly creating that environment that, oh, I need a mentor, this is what I need from a mentor, but rather just following on and essentially walking on the trail of your curiosity and figuring out if there is a mentor who can help you, whether officially or unofficially. And the question I have around this is, a lot of people I speak to who do search for mentors or someone who can really provide them the similar support that you had, are either too reluctant to really go out and network, or they don't really feel confident that someone out there can actually say yes to them.
They definitely can't say yes to them if you don't ask the question.
Yeah.
That was always my perception, was someone's always got the option to say no. And occasionally people did say no. I'm sorry, I just don't have the time for taking on another mentee, or, I don't have the capacity for it. And I said, okay, fine. Can we just have a one-off chat? And most people, when you ask them about something they love or they're interested in, will always find time for a quick chat, for a quick coffee and a chat. And it doesn't need to be more formal than that. Because the mentor is a guide. It's not somebody, who acts as a crutch to help you stand up. It's more somebody who kind of is there to help you open your perspective to things you can't see yourself, things you don't know yourself, and just create opportunities. And I've always had a very positive attitude, and this definitely comes from my father, who's the eternal optimist. But I always see good in people. So even when somebody, potentially upsets me, I'm very empathetic. I'm always looking for what's going on with them. What's the reason they've just reacted in the way that they have, and that I always find a way to connect with people on a deeper level. If I can't, then that's a very clear, intuitive sign for me that that's not somebody who I will get value out of working with. So this, to me, is very much an intuitive feeling or sense that I get as to, how can I connect with you? How do I open that person up? How do I learn more about them? Because it's not just about the job, and it never has been. It's about the person. I'm always interested in, like you're doing, what's that person's story? What's interesting about them? What unlocks my understanding of them and their understanding of me? Because that's obviously our basic human need, is to understand and to be understood.
That's actually quite interesting, and I would love to explore this further on this. Like, the meta question I have when you were sharing this experience was how do you recognize that this is the right mentor for yourself? And you mentioned a few times this intuition about whether it's working or not, whether it's the right person or not. Could you throw more light on this? Like for someone who is in a position or looking out for a mentor, what would be the ways do you advise them to recognize if someone who they have approached is the right mentor for themselves?
Yeah, that's a good one. How do you explain your feelings? Part of it is trusting that intuition in you to say yes or no. And there's a portion of it, if your reaction is negative, to also challenge why it's negative. So I think it was the year before last, I was in a session with somebody and he made me feel exceedingly uncomfortable. And so part of my instinct was to shy away and to kind of not engage with this person further. And actually, what I did was send them an email straight after and said, I'd like to talk to you in the next week. And we connected. And he said, right, why did you request this? And I said, because you've made me feel exceedingly uncomfortable. And that tells me that there's something I need to learn here. And he looked confused, I must say. But it's not just looking for somebody who makes you feel comfortable. It's looking for somebody who's either got challenging views that you are interested in, not challenging views as in, you don't want to be in the same room as this person, but challenging you in an interesting and maybe even provocative way slightly. But also, you get the feeling that their intentions, the things that are important to them, are somehow aligned to yours. They're never going to be completely aligned, but understanding a little about what drives them, what's important to them. And if you can understand that, then you can fairly clearly say, is this someone who can add or help me in some way, open my eyes to something I can't see right now? Or is this just a relationship that's just not going to be worth the investment of time? Because any relationship is an investment of time on both parties. I'm not sure I've explained that very well. I'm not sure I've answered your question, but at the same time, it is exceedingly difficult to put into words the emotions and the feelings that kind of are behind why we can connect with some people and why other people we struggle to connect with.
I think you did. What I take away from this is you don't necessarily look for someone who makes you comfortable and you said, oh yeah, this person is great, let's sign that person up as a mentor. But rather, they may have a challenging view about something, or they can provoke you, but in a way where they're not demeaning you. And you said about aligned intentions, which means either they do it out of helping you or opening your eyes to something different, but not in a way where I would say you feel bad about yourself.
Right. That you feel threatened or disrespected.
You feel threatened. That's true. And I think there is obviously very interesting difference from having an experience like this versus with someone who is said, oh, this guy is not right. So as I said, it's there are nuances to this. It's not a black and white, and you need to be mindful about it. And I think this also, we can actually go a little bit deeper into this as well, is, how to figure out someone who is pushing you, challenging you, but yet you feel that they have the best interest of yourself, of yours, in their intention.
I've actually got a great example for you here, because this is something that happened to me, just with what you're saying, just brought it back. Was when I was, as I said, I was going through multiple miscarriages. So I was very emotional in the background. I hid it from people at work as much as I could. My boss knew what was going on, but I felt very ashamed, but also very vulnerable. because I felt like it would impact my career. And obviously, like I said, I was trying to change into a different role. And I remember having various discussions and feeling quite emotional about the whole idea of changing roles, but also not really knowing what I wanted to change into. So I didn't know I wanted to go into sales. I was looking for something that would just challenge it, but at the same time would interest me. And I had a chat with one of our bosses. I remember we were just sat at a huge conference room, the two of us, and he started getting, the only way I could say it, he started getting aggressive with me in terms of saying, so, why do you want to change? And, don't you feel like you ought to stick with engineering? That's what you've been doing, and investing and, swapping around and changing jobs all the time is not good for your CV, and basically getting quite judgmental, I would guess, in terms of why I was suddenly requesting to maybe look at a move into his area. And I very rarely cried at work, but he made me cry. And at that point, he looked shocked. And he was like, "Oh my goodness, I'm sorry I've done it again." And I was just like baffled, because my expectation is when you cry at work that, it's the worst thing that I felt like I could do was to show my emotion at work. But he just pushed me at a point when I was, feeling very vulnerable, and I felt really judged and was, like you're saying, always felt disrespected. And he turned around at that point and said, "I'm so sorry. I always want to push people. I want to challenge people to a point where they are doing the best for themselves. But I didn't mean to, I didn't mean to push you to the point of tears, and I certainly did not mean to upset you." And it was interesting because this guy ended up as one of my go-tos, one of my sounding boards over the years thereafter, because we'd had this moment together. And, at the point, I'm absolutely sat there crying, thinking I'm absolutely mortified by the fact that I'm crying in front of this guy, that most people, struggle with him. And it just opened up a whole new level of our relationship. And no, I don't advocate going and getting emotional, but because that's not my go-to. I'm usually a positive person, I'm usually very optimistic. It triggered such a reaction in him to see me getting upset, that actually it created a bond between us, that he recognized he'd gone too far. He apologized, and also we kind of started co-mentoring, so it was great. Sometimes things appear when you least expect it.
This is actually a really good example. I resonate with this a lot. I think in my some years back, I think even my previous places where I was working, I had kind of similar experience where I was the person that you're talking about in a similar setup. I was mentoring someone and I pushed them, and I realized that I pushed them really hard. And I was mindful that I'm doing it out of good intention, but I did not express it in that way where the other person felt that I was having the right intention. And I kind of, this created this uncomfortable situation. And the good thing was, this person came back to me and said that, what, I felt uncomfortable with that conversation, and we spoke about it, and I obviously realized where I was wrong in my execution, and this really created also a bond between both of us at that time. And that said, okay, and it still is, and I'm happy that in some sense I had this uncomfortable situation and conversation, but there was something positive that came out of it.
Yeah, I think there's always an opportunity, even of those interactions where you leave it thinking, "Oh my goodness, what has just happened?" I would always challenge people to go away and look for the gift or the opportunity that's arisen, because we are very much dominated by our ape brain, the kind of fight or flight mode, and so there is a lot of kind of negative perception that if we allow it to drive, it will sit in the driver's seat quite happily and take us on a journey. And we do need to train this positive part of our brain to say, okay, maybe that didn't go as I wanted it to, but how do I refocus and look at where I still want to go? What's changed? What's the opportunity? What's the sun coming out of the clouds, the rainbow behind potentially what's just happened? Because, and I'm saying that because a lot of these kind of interactions where we feel conflict is because we don't understand the intention, or we're not clear on our intentions, like you say. And yet, by getting clearer on our intentions and actually communicating them to the other person or the other people around us, especially in a business context, can really help people understand you, understand what's going on. And this is one of the reasons why, like I've called my business Unique You, because I think it's so important that people stand up and are proud of themselves as they are. They're proud of the values, they're proud of their strengths, they're proud of their life story, and don't try and kind of compartmentalize it and hide it away somewhere. But actually let it be a part of them. But in order to do that, we need to be able to have conversations around things like you're just saying that are difficult. What I would call courageous conversations, where we don't just talk facts and figures and data. And this is one of the biggest reasons why I love to help tech companies still. A, I'm passionate about technology and just get excited by it. But B, because I think there's a real flaw in our education, if you want to call it that, which means we're trained to have technical discussions around facts and figures. We're not trained to dig that level deeper and say, I can sense you're getting emotional about this. What's there? What's that telling us? Because we're emotional beings. We can't take the emotion out of a discussion. And actually, if people are getting emotional, it means they care. So you want an employee that cares. So by ignoring emotion and not being able to voice it, not being able to step into these discussions courageously, we're actually only limiting ourselves and our team's ability to really innovate, to be creative. So it is about allowing these kind of discussions, and that person who can see it is courageous to say, actually that didn't feel right for me. That didn't resonate with how I want to work. But allowing open and non-judgmental discussions to kind of open up those layers of the onion and look as to what's really there. What are we dealing with?
Yeah, I think this is really powerful. I think it comes down to the point that, are you in that conversation, in that engagement, are you mindful of how and what you're presenting to the other person? And I think for me personally, this resonates really well. Now when I talk to someone, I know if I'm pushing someone, I'm very explicit and saying that, what, my intention with what I'm going to do next is put you through a contrasting opinion, an opinion or thought that might be different from you, and I want you to reflect on it and not just react. And I create that space for other people to know my intention up front. And this front loading this intention before I say the message sometimes has saved me a lot from difficult conversations where perhaps the other person would have interpreted the information coming from me in a completely different way.
Yeah, that's so true. What you do is like you did with me at the start of this. You allow or design the framework for the discussion, and by telling somebody your intention, you're explaining to them what you want to achieve. So you help them understand where you're coming from. What position are you coming from? And I do this with all of my clients. Is you're designing the alliance. You're designing the space to allow that person to get the most out of the conversation, and to allow yourself in some ways to get the most out of the conversation. But with coaching, and leadership and coaching are so close in what they're trying to achieve, is creating a non-judgmental space for somebody to reflect, to grow, to challenge themselves, to step into what they want to achieve. So that's what it's so important about what you're saying there, is by setting the intention, you potentially can ask a more difficult question, because the other person already recognizes, okay, they're doing this with the intention of challenging me to grow, or they're doing this with the intention of opening up a new perception for me, new opportunities. And people take things very differently when they understand that as an intention.
Thank you. This is really, really good. I want to come back to your life journey again. I think all roads connect to that. I want to touch upon the part around you moving to setting up your own coaching practice. Tell me a little bit about what led to you being starting this exercise of as a coach, and this starting this setup called Unique You. What was the what are the ideas that you had that coaching is the place for yourself, and how was that process for yourself?
Yeah, so I left Rolls-Royce not knowing what I was going to do. I knew I wanted to do something different. I knew I had a very transferable skill set because of all the different roles I'd had within the company. But being a generalist as well was something I wasn't sure was an advantage when I was looking for a new job in a country where I speak the language, but I would struggle to read a contract in German, for example. So there were limitations as to the types of role that I could potentially, or I felt like I could take in Germany. I'd always had this idea that I'd quite like to try coaching. I usually got told as feedback that, you need to lean more into coaching or leading by coaching and empowering others and helping the organization to grow through kind of helping other leaders understand how to do this. So I was kind of in this space, but I hadn't ever done a formal coaching qualification. I just led by the way that I believed to be empowering other people. So I decided that I would do my coaching qualification. I went off down that route, knowing that as a minimum, I would use it in a job somewhere else. But there was always this potential that I could potentially start something else on my own. But I was very unsure. And whilst doing my coaching qualification, the opportunity came up to work for Climate Kick at their Berlin accelerator program, their startup program, as their tech coach. And I thought, oh, that sounds fun. Technology, sustainability, and coaching. So applied to do that and was offered the job, but at the same time I was told, well, if you want to do this, we need to be able to pay you, so you need to start your own company. I was like, oh, that's an interesting point. Yes, I guess I do. So when I founded my company, it was just from a point of, well, I have to have a vehicle to be able to be paid by Climate Kick. And it was a point of, okay, so if I was going to do this, what would I want to do? And obviously being on the coaching journey itself, so learning to be a coach and going through a coaching qualification takes you on your own journey. And so this was a lot of sort of the developing that I was doing at that time. And it really evolved from there, from recognizing the values, the very strong values which I had for sustainability, technology, and coaching people to kind of be the best form of themselves. And it's a matter of, or it has been a matter of the last 2 years of really feeling my way through. What feels right? What would I want to do? What's more, how could I have more fun than what I'm doing? And I get to meet inspiring people who want to make the world a better place, who I can help create more impact through coaching. And it's really about sort of, letting or seeing people when they have those aha moments and thinking, something's just fundamentally changed in their perception of what they can do right now. And then seeing how that sort of unravels and how you can support them to really challenge themselves to grow. And it's funny because when I was in industry, I quite often shied away from necessarily voicing my instinct or saying exactly what I thought because I was scared of conflict. And yet, as a coach, I have to step into that because that's where you can help people by having a challenging conversation, opening up something to them they cannot see for themselves. And it really is those moments that when I'm thinking, oh my goodness, what are they going to think when I say this? That quite often creates the impact that someone says, no one's ever said that to me before. I've never realized that before. I've never seen that. And, those moments where something really fundamentally changes. So it enabled me to step into having courageous conversations with my clients, knowing that actually by creating a safe space, a non-judgmental space, where they can look in the mirror and see themselves for who they are and see where they're actually not showing up for themselves or not aligning to their values or not using their strengths, that we can really create change.
Right. This is something I wanted to ask you right at the beginning of our conversation. But as a coach, obviously you shared a lot of these intentions that you have for the people that you work with around sustainability, growing them, making sure that they are able to bring their authentic self on a day-to-day basis. I am curious what goes behind the scene. Like, what are the challenges that you face as a coach when you have to get into these situations on a day-to-day basis? And if you could share a little bit about how do you prepare yourself to kind of go through those challenges as a coach?
Good question. Um, I have to be very conscious as to how many sessions I can run in a day, because when you're coaching someone, you are present, fully present with that person, because you're looking for signs of what they're going through and voicing things which you're sensing from them. So there's a part that I really have to look after myself. I can't serve my clients unless I am in a good place, unless I'm rested, unless I am, in a way or in a place where I can support them. And it's exceedingly difficult as a coach, but also as somebody who is very empathetic, I guess, with other people, to really kind of almost honor them. So actually, me sympathizing with somebody, although I might be able to do it, and part of me will potentially want to do it, it's not the place where I'm holding them accountable and responsible for themselves. I can empathize with them, and I can still challenge them at the same time. So that balance can sometimes be really difficult, but it's a matter of standing there and every time asking what's going to serve my client best at this point. Because over time, obviously, I get to understand my clients, I get to see them, I get to sort of live in their shoes with them a little. And it's about how can I support them to grow the most? And where that is in terms of kind of the business is you sometimes feel like, well, why am I different to any of the other coaches that are potentially out there? There are a lot of people, if you go search coach on the internet, you can find a lot of people. And actually, what I've recognized is I'm different because I have a lot of industrial experience. I have leadership experience, and I'm talking about leadership a lot of my day, helping people in these scenarios. But also, it's about how I connect with people. Is that I'm interested in people, and I can connect with people, which allows them to trust me quite quickly. And that is really key in being able to build a trusting relationship with somebody where they can open up and feel like they're not being judged. As soon as someone feels like they're being judged, you're in a space where you're not going to be able to help them. And actually, as a coach, as soon as you feel like you're in that space, you need to call it, because you cannot serve somebody as a coach from that position. You have to be able to hold them in a space where they can understand for themselves what the meaning of it, how they can, use that interpretation and how they can grow. And a lot of it is coaching. And there's a big portion of helping people understand, okay, so how do I communicate about this to myself and to other people? And giving people kind of the tools to be able to have courageous conversations with other people, speak their mind in a way which opens up a conversation and leaves others not feeling judged. So there's all these different aspects that I guess come into the equation in terms of what I now do. Has it been an easy journey? No, it hasn't. And I'm exceedingly grateful I've managed to create what I have in the last 2 years, especially with COVID coming and all of a sudden me going from spending 2 days a week in Berlin dealing with clients to 5 days a week at home in front of a laptop. But that's also given me amazing opportunities to deal with more people internationally. So, like I said earlier, if you can see the opportunities that these things bring and not be scared to just try, even if you fail, then these are how you build a business. And it is about organic growth. It's not about creating success overnight. And actually, it's not money that drives me. It's about being able to help people who want to create a positive impact, create more impact.
Yeah. Thank you, Sarah. I think it's amazing to have this conversation with you. I would have loved to go spend more time on this because there's so many different directions that we can run from here to with our conversations. But I'm also respectful and mindful of your time. My last question for you, as we end this conversation for now, is for individuals, for leaders, for people who are out there who are going through their day-to-day experiences with their own challenges in their organizations, in their teams. What has been your experience for these individuals to recognize they need someone like you as a coach? I know sometimes, of being myself as a leader, I often think about how can I be a better leader to the people I work with? Can I be a coach? Can I help them be successful? Where can I push them? Where can I make sure that they are accountable for things? But often there are situations where I feel that I'm not enough. Like I need support. I need external help. It would be good to know from you what would be those indicators where such a leader can recognize that they need an outside support. They need someone like you to come in and support them in their journey.
So I think there are a couple of things. One is if you can see that your people are demotivated, that they're not engaging, they're not sparking, getting excited about work. And if you don't know as a leader how to help your team back out of that, then a coach is a good way to do it. Because as I always say, that taking a team from surviving to thriving starts with you as the leader. Because if you've got the wrong team, then you've probably hired the wrong people. And obviously, there are a number of things around that which can help you still create the team that you want. And there'll be some difficult decisions to make. So it's around being able to create an environment for your team to thrive. It's around being able to know what your team needs to be able to thrive. What skills are you missing? What competencies do you need to build on? How can you help your team play more to their strengths so they have more fun? Work shouldn't be about it being hard work all the time. I think it's a misconception that comes from work like 20 years ago or something, which unfortunately is still present. But how do you ensure that your team, or you're able to serve your team in a way that, like you say, helps them grow and develop? And if you're not sure how to do that and you can't find support internally to help you do that, then engaging with a coach is a space where you can be challenged yourself and also for your team. So with the intention of going into something like this, you can do team coaching, you can do leadership coaching. All of these possibilities exist, and it really depends on what's there for you, what do you see, and also what does your team need from you, to be able to build that trust, to be able to work together, to be able to communicate, because all of that is essential to being able to create the space for a team to thrive.
That is actually a really good end to this conversation. So creating a space for your team to thrive. So moving from surviving to thriving. I will keep this as a catchline for our conversation today. I enjoyed this conversation really so much, and thank you so much, Sarah. I hope it was also good for you to get into this podcast and also share your thoughts and share your story with the listeners of this podcast.
Yes, as I said to you before, I mean, for me, it's always a position of, if sharing a story and the questions you've asked are different to what other people have asked me, and if sharing this story helps one person either make a positive change in their lives, or have a new perception of something, or see something they didn't see about themselves before, then we've done our job. So I think that's the most important bit for me.
So true.
Thank you so much for allowing me to come on.
Thank you. I can't thank you enough, and I appreciate the time. And I am really eager that, when our paths cross again, which I'm hoping very soon, we get you on the show back and we can talk about other interesting aspects of your experience and of your journey.
Yes, I mean, I'd love to hear feedback. So if any of the listeners want to provide feedback, if they've got questions they want to post to me, please do. And I'll do my best to answer them. And also we can share them so that other people can see what's being asked.
Yeah. And what is the best way for people to reach out to you, Sarah?
So either on LinkedIn, LinkedIn's got all of my details, or on my website, which is www.unique-u.de.
Fantastic. I will leave these details on the show notes.
Great. Thanks, Vivek.
Thank you, Sarah, and have a great rest of your day and also your week.
Thank you, too. Take care.
Bye.